Hey there. In this video, we're going to talk about how to create a flow that can trigger another flow from any of your integration tiles in your Integrator IO. Let's take a look at this tile here that I've created for triggering flows. So here what we're going to see is I have this trigger for triggering a customer import flow from another tile. And then after it completes, it's going to trigger another flow or another trigger, which will then trigger this other flow from another tile, which is for importing orders. So this trigger and this trigger actually goes to another tile, which is this tile right here. And what they do is basically trigger this customer import flow, and then it triggers the order import flow. And we can take a quick look at how that happens or how that's executed. So we can see here in my run history that I first ran my trigger for triggering the customer import flow. So it triggered this flow to run from my Magento tile. And then after that's completed, this next trigger ran for the order import, which triggered this order import flow to run on this tile. So that's how it's supposed to work in terms of what we can do here is really create our own sequence for when to run these flows. So in this case, we were able to run the customer import flow and then the order import flow. So let's take a look at the configuration. So first thing we need in order to actually access flows from other tiles would be an API token. So if we go here to this section, you can create a new token and you give it a name, and you can set the purging to never, so it doesn't expire, and you can set it to full access. So that's what I've done here in my trigger flows API token. If I click on that, we can see that it's auto purchase never and it's full access. Now let's go to the flow configuration. So my tile is this trigger flow here. Now here in the customer import, we can see there are two steps here. The first step pulls the information from the tile where we want to trigger flows from, and the second step basically triggers that flow. Now, if we go to this first step here, first thing you'll notice here is the connection. So this is using that the connection that goes into Integrator IO, goes to the API of Integrator IO and pulls the information. And if we edit this connection, this is how the connection is configured. We're pointing to this api.integrator.io. These settings just come by default, so you can leave it that way. And then for the auth type, you want to set it to token. And then we paste the token that we just created there. And then you'll need these settings: send token via HTTP header, and header name is authorization, and the header scheme is bearer. So this connection is basically just an HTTPS connection. If you wanted to create a new connection in your tile, you can just go to connections and then click on create connection. and you can look for HTTPS, and then you can configure the settings here. And then you can use that connection in your flow. So going back to this, if you click on this export right here, so what this does is it pulls information from another tile of what flows reside in that tile. And what you'll see here is V1 integrations, and then this part right here is the ID of that tile. So let's exit out of this first. And let's say I want to pull or trigger a flow from this tile. If I click on that tile, I can find my integration ID there. So I can copy this. And then when I go back to my custom flow, just paste that in here. And then if you do a preview of this, you're going to see that it pulls the information of all the flows in that tile. So in this case, you can see the order import. And then what else do we have here? Customer group. This is the customer add flow, or the customer import flow, as we refer to it. And then this one is for the order import. Also, one more thing, the export type, you can set that to all. So it pulls all the information. And we're going to need the ID of the flow that you want to trigger. So in this case, I can copy this ID if this is the flow that I want to run. Now keep in mind that this first step actually pulls all the flows from the specific tile. So you want to be able to filter just the flows that you want. So in this case, this specific ID is what will tell the flow to only trigger this specific flow when it goes to the next step of actually triggering that flow. So we can exit out of this. So what I've done here is I've added a filter. If you click the plus sign, you can add this filter. And then what we're going to see here is the record.id, which is this part right here, and equals, and then you paste the ID there. That way, the filter will only pick up that specific flow and then ignore the rest of the flows. And then on this step, which is the actual trigger, what you'll see here is that it says flows and then the ID, and then you see this run function, which will actually execute that flow. All right, so that's the basic configuration of how the flow triggers another flow. And then the next thing is, if you want another trigger to run after this trigger completes, you can go into this section and then use this setting for next integration flow to run your next trigger. In this case, this trigger Magento order import will then trigger this, and this is a trigger for the other flow in that other tile. All right, so I think that's it for the proof of concept here of creating flows that trigger other flows. And then after that flow executes, you can trigger it or trigger another flow as the next flow. And of course, you can add more into the sequence if you want, for instance, to trigger another flow from the same tile. You can do so by just using the next integration flow setting. All right, thanks for watching.